Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by Loughborough University. This podcast seeks to bring together the worlds of academia and professional practice. If you're interested in the latest research and trends in sport, then this is the podcast for you. Today, Research Associate, Loughborough alumni and para-athlete Sam Ruddock takes the reins. Sam leads the conversation with colleagues on an international research project focused on para-sport against stigma. The researchers discuss the role the media plays in changing attitudes around the world. We'll hear some of the personal experiences and challenges of living with disabilities in African countries. And finally, we hear how sport can play a role in changing people's lives and how the Paralympics has inspired athletes from around the world to achieve their dreams.
Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for choosing to listen once again to the Experts in Sport podcast. Martin has given us the reins for a brief half an hour to 40 minutes to talk to you a little bit about a 4-year project that is on approach. As we all know, the Tokyo 2020, former Loughborough students, alumni, Paralympian, but most importantly, a research associate for this project, which is called Parasport Against Stigma. It is a sub-project of a wider project called AT 2030. It is funded by UK Aid and led by the Global Disability Innovation Hub. This project is led by Loughborough University, London, in partnership with the International Paralympic Committee and the University of Malawi. And joining me on the pod today, I have 3 guests, experts in their field, that will tell you a bit more about the project, how it's going to work, and the kind of impact it will have as we look forward towards the end of this cycle, but the beginning of another cycle, landing at the end of Paris 2024. So introducing Dr. Emma Pollen. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Sam.
Thank you for joining us. Also, Nyasha Murakoa.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Nyasha. Good to see you. Good to hear you, I should say. And last but not least, we have Mufu Magalasi.
Hello, Sam. All the way from Malawi here.
Thanks for checking in, Mufu. So everybody, before we get started, before we get into the nitty gritty of what this project is going to do, tell us a bit more about yourselves. Emma, ladies first. Why not? We'll start with the doctor in the house.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm a lecturer at Loughborough University, and my research is mainly in Paralympic broadcasting, Paralympic media, and I look at different types of broadcasting environments and how Paralympic sports and Paralympic media can have a positive impact on public attitudes toward disability. So it's looking at, I suppose, thinking about communication as a way to progress social change in a positive way, and try and reduce the stigma associated with disability. And I've worked previously on London and Rio Paralympic Games and the London and Rio broadcasting, and particularly looking at Channel 4's coverage and the role that had, the impact that had on our kind of attitudes around disability and the progress we've made so far, in relation to people's understanding of disability as a result of some of that very progressive and very impactful and engaging coverage. So yeah, that's basically what I do in a nutshell.
And I'm sure you would have a lot to say about London 2012 and the impact that had across the nation as a whole. I don't think anybody has ever seen a broadcasting or a marketing campaign quite like that before, that brought the games truly into everyone's households across the country and across the world in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, it was a watershed moment really in Paralympic broadcasting, and Channel 4 globally is seen as the kind of the best practice globally, by broadcasters, as a way of doing Paralympic coverage. This is how it's done. This is the kind of the way to gain the most impact. And I think it's since then, in terms of the global audience following of the games, it's been increasing every 4 years. So clearly it's going in the right direction.
With the aim of this project, of course, bringing the games to new audiences that probably have never seen or heard it before, which is going to be really, really exciting. And the impact, the overall impact of that will be to bring hopefully new coaches and new athletes into the sport, not just at the Paralympic level, but also at the national level, across their country and across their region, which can bring me very, very, very nicely towards Nyasha. Now, Nyasha is currently based in Germany with the IPC, but but he himself he would say, I don't know if he would say he's a former wheelchair tennis player anymore. I think he would say he still plays wheelchair tennis. So Nyasha, please take the floor and tell everyone a bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Sam. I definitely don't see myself as a former, but I think I pay less and less that I will be getting to that stage at this point. But yeah, so I'm from Zimbabwe and I'm a wheelchair tennis player. I was at the London 2012 Games. It was my first and only games for now. And I played in the men's singles representing my country. I've done quite a number of sports before that, but never at the same level that I did in wheelchair tennis. And my love for the sport and seeing the difference that it did for me made me do my studies in Paralympic sport for my master's, which eventually got me working for the IPC. So in relation to this project, I'm working in the sport development department. Our pillar is Pillar 3 athlete development, and I work with my colleagues there with regards to that aspect, working with the 3 countries that are part of this project, Zambia, Malawi, and Ghana. And that is my role as a programs coordinator in relation to the Parasport Against Stigma initiative.
It's a big task. It's a big job, isn't it? To find athletes and to find coaches and to develop the pathway from, and also the knowledge and the expertise, which I'm sure many people have come across before. Maybe a lack of knowledge has only instilled perhaps fear or reluctance to engage with someone with a disability because they don't understand or are not quite sure. And I'm sure you would say that our job is to help get rid of that fear and help that misunderstanding turn into greater knowledge, which makes athletes and coaches feel much more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not a small task, but I think we are on the right path, and a project like this will hopefully be that drop in the ocean that drives the communities in these countries in the right direction in terms of how we see disability in society in general, and also how we recognize that people with disabilities are people with abilities that can live normally and independently. And if we give them the right environment, they can also do well in fields like sport, like any other person. So definitely a welcome project, in my opinion. The timing couldn't have been better. I mean, this is a good start, I think.
I'm glad you agree, and you're right in what you say. That the overall task is to not just develop athletes, but to build people and help them find their feet, literally find their feet in general society, and building relationships and changing opinion and changing perspectives and reducing the stigma, which is the point of the entire project. Which brings us finally to Mufu, who is in Malawi. And Mufu, I'm sure you have. It would be very, very easy for us to say, here's a development toolkit. We're going to put this on radio. We're going to put this on television. Here you go and use it. But it needs to be in the right language. It needs to be in the right context. It needs to be in the right setting. And the work you are doing through community engagement is really going to help us to do that. Just tell us a bit more about yourself and how you found your way into Parasport Against Stigma.
All right. Thank you very much, Sam. My name, as said, Mufunanji Magalasi, and I'm an associate professor of drama and development media. And the work that I have been doing in the past 23 years has been to work in development communication. Looking at how communication can actually be used as partly a tool of what resolving conflicts in society, you know, and whether it is through theatre for development, which is, I think, one of the many face-to-face communication that we use in Africa and in sub-Saharan Africa. But apart from that, the idea of mobile screening, for example, you know, I've been working at this university and I've done this work in South Africa. I was at Wits University, but I briefly had a stint in the UK at Leeds University, worked with colleagues there, Jen Plasto and all at the Workshop Theatre, working in Greater Leeds, Chapeltown, Bradford and all. And about this project, I think it's very exciting for me to be part of it for a number of reasons. Firstly, we're using sports as an entry point, and I have known sports as a performance, sports as a public performance, which entertains, but in this case, sports is coming in to be not only to entertain, but also to try to create a platform or to start to provoke a dialogue in Malawian society, for example, as regards to stigma that we have. The main thing that we're talking about here is access. Human development starts with access. And here in Malawi, we are bogged down, I think, by so many issues, so many traditions that look at disability in this way and that, and they are having a very bad, I think, effect on other people within society who are considered disabled, as it were, So my coming into this project is to try for me to see how we can go to engage communities, but engaging communities beyond the cities, because when we talk about broadcast, TV broadcast, in Malawi, it's a city thing. It is a city thing. About 12% of the population on televisions in this country. So you have about 88% which does not have access to that television. And I guess that is where I come in, that we are going to take this to the rural communities. We're going to take the broadcast to rural communities. But apart from that, in terms of edutainment, we are also going to create a drama series which would provoke dialogue, which would provoke discussion around these issues. So for me, it's very, very exciting. What I see myself doing in here, how I see myself contributing is to try to bring in my passion, because I'm a very passionate person as a performer. I'm an actor and I'm a director. And that passion, I want to see how we can use this as a way of trying to nibble at this stigma that lives with us as Malawians, and especially in rural communities. City, I'm sure Nyasha would agree with me, cities easily change. But in the rural areas, sometimes because information doesn't get to them, they take a bit of time to change. So my coming in here, I think, is to try as much as possible to contribute a drop in the ocean. Yes, a drop in the ocean, but to contribute whatever little I can to try to see how we bring this problem down. People, when they are disabled, are not unable. And that's the whole point, I think, that I'm excited to be part of.
Thank you, Mufu. And you said it wonderfully well. We need to increase the access. That is the very foundation of human existence, is access to opportunity and access to prosperity. And you spoke about Nyasha. We are doing our work in Malawi, Ghana, and Zambia, but Nyasha comes from Zimbabwe, and his story would tell us a lot more. A very, very interesting case study as to how he found his way from the streets, as it were, into the Paralympic Games. Nyasha, if you tell us a bit more about that, we'd have an interesting case study to attach to the context that Mufu is actually talking about.
Yes, it's quite a long story, but let me touch the basics. I think the most important parts for this conversation. So I was born with a disability in 1983, and I was born in a rural setup where I didn't have any assistive devices that could help me, and I grew up crawling around on my fours to get around, and my family putting me on their backs my parents and my siblings to get around. And I only got my first wheelchair quite late, and it was not a child's chair, for example. It was an adult wheelchair, which had small wheels, all four, which you wouldn't push even if you were an adult. That was my first moment getting access to an assistive technology that could help me in relation to my disability.
It's not very technical, is it? It doesn't sound very technical.
No. But fast forward, I go to what we call special schools here. So schools for people with certain types of disability, in this case physical, and where you are in one school, and that's where I got a better chair, which still wasn't a custom-made chair. But in that school, I also then started doing a lot of activities and sport. And I moved to a different school for secondary education and high school, primarily hoping to be a successful wheelchair racer. But I never owned a wheelchair myself for the sport. And then along the way, I bumped into a person who offered to teach me wheelchair tennis. Like you said, it was on the street, literally on the street. And then I thought I would just go and try it out. And, it started as a once a week thing for like a couple of years. Quite difficult to learn. If you know how tennis difficult it is to get a ball over the net into the court. The first few times is difficult. But I didn't really think of it as something that I would want to pursue to a higher level at that stage. But along the way, I had to go to university, move to a different city, forgot about the sport. And then only when I finished my first degree and I was in between getting a job, that I then went back to the coach and said, hey, and then he said to me, come live with me while you're looking for a job. We play tennis. So it became a daily thing because that's his daily job. And because I didn't have anything to do, you wake up, you go to the courts, you play, you rest, you get back on the court until evening when you're done. And you can imagine over a period of about 6 months doing that 6 days a week, my progression was quite immense in that short period.
Some would say you might improve. And your cross court game, your short game might improve.
Yeah. I then started participating in international tournaments in neighboring South Africa, and I was doing fairly well. And then that motivation came, and I said, I'm dropping everything else I've been thinking I want to do, and this is what I want to do. So that was around 2008 now. And it was too close to make any effort to go to Beijing. But I said, London 2012, I have to go for it. So with the support of many people, I managed to attend some tournaments. And along the way, I got a tennis scholarship from a university in South Africa to move from Zimbabwe to go play tennis and study. And so I moved across. It was much better because I had access to coaching, physio, money being paid for me to play the tournaments. So I spent about 5 years. So I did another undergrad then all the way to my master's with that university. And my game also developed. And in 2012, I managed to fulfill a dream to be competing at the games, which was quite amazing because if you had asked me like 3-4 years earlier if this would have led to that stage, I would have said, yeah, I would love to, but I don't see myself in there. In fact, quite a number of times in the journey, because of the challenges that you'd have with not getting resources to fully support, you sort of ask yourself, hey, am I going to go further? Is this how far I go? But then you just put your shoulder to the wheel and you keep going. And with the support of different people, you see yourself going from one step to the other. And that is a summary of my journey to the games. I still look and I consider myself very lucky, a person from my upbringing in my community to ever dreamt of being at an international tournament and winning a tournament. In that sport, it was completely out. So I think for me, it's still an amazing story for myself because sports like tennis are not easy and they are not cheap. Normally, there's a lot of money that is put in there. So, but I didn't see that at the time. I was just driving mad trying to play. And with the help of people around me, I saw myself getting from one step to the next. And yeah, I am today telling my story.
is what is wonderful to hear. And it often starts with a coach, doesn't it? It starts with a knowledgeable coach, and a big part of what this project is hoping to achieve is to develop coaches, their knowledge, and bring them to Paralympic sport, but not to say that Paralympic sport is different or para sport is different. You just need to adapt your practice, change your delivery to adapt to an athlete's needs and abilities. As we've already mentioned on this podcast, it's not about disability; it's just differing abilities. And you were very fortunate in the way that you fell into the sport. Nyasha, had you actually watched or heard any para sport before you had met that coach?
Yes, so I was lucky that in the school that I was in, primary school, we did a lot of things. So we did sitting volleyball, we did sitting rugby, not wheelchair rugby as it is known as a para sport, but it was like rugby crawling on the floor. We did wheelchair racing because it's a special school for people with physical disabilities. You know, we could do a lot of sports in there. And because I was quite fortunate that my disability only limits my lower limbs. You know, I was one of the fortunate, strong people that could partake in any sport without any fear that I could get injured. So I found myself trying different sports. But again, if you asked me if I ever thought doing that would lead to anything, not really. I just know that I fell in love with wheelchair racing. But for all that time, I couldn't afford to get a chair. But I kept borrowing. There were a few people in the city who had wheelchairs, and I would try and befriend them as young as I was. And then if ever somebody was not going to a race, I would just ask, can I use your wheelchair? I would just grab the chair, go to the starting lineup in the race without any training, because I just hoped that this is what I would do in life. So that's who I was then, before I was introduced to tennis. But I'd never seen any higher level participation, like videos or magazines or anything. So even my dreaming then was not, oh, I want to go higher. I think I only started knowing about the games in the early 2000s because there is a guy from Zimbabwe who won gold in Athens. But then, you know, that I was already in high school then, you know, that's when I started seeing, oh, so sport can take you further.
It's amazing to hear that you would get to the start line and nothing was going to stop you. You had to befriend people that were older than you. That's a very brave thing to do, to approach people years your senior saying, "Can I have your chair, please? I really want to race."
And I was lucky, to be honest, because quite about a number of them, about 3, would borrow me the chair, and I'll go and do a marathon, no training, nothing, and then that'll be good.
But it's the access and the upkeep of that technology. It is technology. A wheelchair for racing and a wheelchair for tennis is very different to a day chair. But we'll touch upon that a bit more, Nyasha, as we go towards the end of the podcast and the overall role of AT. I mean, if you are listening to the podcast, you at the moment are using AT. You're using assistive technology, or you're using a mobile phone. Everything that we use to help us live and make life more easier, that is assistive technology. But with regard to the lack of access that Mufu has already spoken about, that's the main challenge that we're facing. He has spoken already about the lack of access to a television, the main source of how we're going to show this imagery across the countries that we wish to influence. So, Emma, if we can bring the conversation back to you, what are the challenges and how are we going to overcome the challenges of broadcasting in areas that have very little access to the technology that will help proliferate these images that will inspire the next generation of athletes and people?
Yeah, I think there are some really important challenges or barriers to overcome, you know, to get the most out of the broadcast. So, you know, as a kind of backdrop, we've seen Paralympic broadcasting and the coverage has been, you know, a huge success in the global north. And it's made, as I said before, it's really stimulated, more positive attitudes towards disability, participation in para sport at a kind of local level, lots of ways. We're only having this discussion because of the fact that Paralympic broadcasting and coverage has really taken off. This project has only kind of stemmed from the London Olympic Games and Paralympic Games in terms of its the focus around AT access and its positive impact. But of course, the landscape in Paralympic broadcasting is very uneven, and across many parts of the global south, such as sub-Saharan Africa, where this project is focused, the games historically haven't been broadcast, and you see audiences with very limited access to any of the coverage. And the IPC are very aware of that. So developing this, 2020 Paralympics highlights package is going to go out to the region, through TVs. They're aware that actually, and as Mufu I think mentioned before, that there's not a huge proportion of the population that do have access to a television. And actually a lot of people listen to radio and engage in much more kind of community-based communication activities, such as community theatre and community radio, compared with, as opposed to kind of watching TV. So there's a really sort of important media landscape that we need to be aware of when we're sort of broadcasting this highlights package, and we need to intervene really in a way that we can localize the broadcast, and we can actually improve the reach and the impact of the broadcast. Because if we just put it on the TV, it would be, in terms of people watching, it would be fairly limited, and so it wouldn't have the same reach and the same impact as what we've seen in many parts of the global north. So being very mindful of that. What the project is doing is intervening in a way that we try and localize the broadcast, and we're doing that through I think two main ways, and I think Mufu can develop some of these as well in a minute. But one of the things we're doing is we're actually putting with the highlights package, we are actually putting the translation on the package in the indigenous language. So at the moment, the package is going out in English and French, and we're working with local broadcasters to make sure that there's a translation that goes onto that package as well. So if you want to watch it in the local language, you can do that. So that is one way we're trying to improve the kind of reach. Another way is we're trying to engage local community groups and local community theatre and local community radio to cover, or to broadcast some of the Tokyo Games. So this can be done in a kind of short packages where you might get one particular athlete that's doing well, one local athlete that's doing particularly well, and we take that and we put it onto the radio. So also, they're not just listening to the Paralympics. Of all the athletes, are actually listening to their kind of local para athletes and doing the race and what they're doing. And we're also using community theatre, and I think Mufu can probably talk more about that in terms of how we're using community theatre to engage audiences.
I think something we had touched upon in our recent knowledge exchange was the importance of having a translator in the mixed zone, so those athletes and their voice and their stories can be heard, because the English might not be their first language. So to make that highlights package more powerful is to have an actual translator that can bring their stories directly to those people, so they can generally be a source of inspiration. But yes, Mufu, please touch more upon how we're going to, not enough to sit a group of people in front of the television and say, be inspired. How are we going to actually capture these images and make them accessible in the communities? Is it as simple as putting on some music, bringing some jollof and say, come and have a party and learn about the Paralympic Games? How are we going to do it?
I think we have had a number of lessons which we will be basing our experience or practice on. The HIV and the AIDS pandemic gave us a number of lessons in trying to go further to engage communities. Firstly, talking about the packages. When the packages have been translated and there is a voice over in Chichewa, for example, for Malawi, we will show them as mobile cinema. The practice of mobile cinema in this country is long established through agriculture. It actually comes from about the 1930s, where you would have a Land Rover. We call them yellow Land Rovers. You have a Land Rover with big speakers on top of it, and then they would go into communities and show them issues on agriculture. And they would bring along sometimes even a Manchester and Liverpool game, which I first saw in 1972 through these mobile cinemas. So we're going to take to there, but the idea is not just to go and show them. The broadcasts are going to act like a provocateur for discussion, because we will not only just show them, but we will hear their opinions. Because at the end of the day, we want to see how they are accessing it. Are they able to access the highlights that come through? What is it that they are seeing in them? Is there anything that's attractive? But then from there, then we move on to the issue of disability itself, engage them on the issue of disability. And here, beyond now the broadcast, we're going now to engage with them on what their perceptions are. Should, for example, would you allow, for example, your daughter to go and participate in this kind of sports? Why? If yes, why not? If you don't want to, what have been the experiences here in your community, in Kirazulu, for example, one of the areas where we're going to go to? What has been the experience? And then through that engagement, these broadcasts are, I think, going deeper. They're going further than what we thought they would be just for them just to see. In terms of theater for development would engage with generally the idea of parasport itself. It is not very common. Parasport in Malawi is not very common. It has just started. In fact, I first heard about parasport in Malawi about 10 years ago. Because my niece can't speak and can't hear, attended the Montfort School for the deaf, and then as a parent, we would go there on special days, and then they would have all these kinds of sports. But to say that it was being done nationwide, I had never heard about that until last year, when a friend of mine, a journalist, called me to say, will you have time to come and see this? Now, I knew that he was invited later on I learned he was invited by the National Paralympics Committee. James Stutzi invited him to Chirazulu to come and see this. So in terms of theater for development is a platform for engaging with issues, So here, issues of disability, we will talk about them as issues. We will create very short plays around these issues, and these plays are going in the 2 days that we're going to spend in that area for theater for development. We will perform for the bigger community, where we are going to engage these communities even further. Okay, and we do hope that through that, then we are bringing the Malawian society, especially rural communities, closer and closer to understanding that there is nothing wrong. It could have been it's just like an accident. There's nothing really wrong, or there is no taboo in you actually allowing these kinds of things to be happening. But also issues of access to buildings. If you come to Malawi today, most of our buildings, most of our premises do not have those kinds of things. So we'll be bringing in issues like those, and we do hope, working also alongside Center for Social Research, Later on, funding allowing, we wanted to engage policymakers. There are organizations in this country like FEDOMA. FEDOMA is a federation of organizations of people with disabilities. It's a federation of NGOs in this country. And they do the work. But us as a project, as Parasport Against Stigma, we want to try to go and to put in more voice, more noise about this to the policymakers, so that then at the end of the day, we are not only aware about the sports, but the sports becomes some kind of a watershed, to use Emma's word. It becomes like some kind of a watershed for us to start dialoguing about these issues, where certain people are not allowed to access certain things because we think they are not able. It's a thought. It's not that they are not. We just think that they are not. And we have grown to believe that that is how things should be. This time, it's time for change. So the community engagement will be working using the translated and localized TV broadcasts to engage the communities in dialogue, to talk about these things so that we can try to bring about this change, so that then we live to the word of possible. And I like that word. I love that word.
Mm-hmm. The I'm Possible program that's being led on by the IPC will go a long way to help change that perception, using sport as the vehicle. As you say, it's going to, hopefully that will change the attitude, and they can actually achieve what they want to achieve. They're not incapable. They're very, very, very capable. But what you've touched upon is that it's very, very important is the stakeholders, the policymakers. They're the ones that hold the keys. They're the ones that can control the access to a building in that sense. So funding being a very, very important, plays a very important role and seeing the value. Why is giving someone access, giving a human being a chance to access opportunity, why is that valuable, and how can we make that something that is profitable? If you how a business thinks, how is this going to bring it? Oh, well, I bring more people through my doors, I make more money. But this person with a disability, I don't value them. But then we change their minds, we change their value, and they therefore become value if we talk about it in a purely economic sense. And in terms of economics and the proliferation of AT and assistive technology, it's the maintenance and the upkeep of these pieces of technology that help an athlete achieve their dreams, like a wheelchair tennis chair. These things can break down and they can become very, 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 very old. And is that going to help an athlete reach the top of their game? Probably not. But if we go from the very, very basic level to the very international level, Nyasha, what are the challenges that an athlete would face if they were to go from a regional tournament in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and Ghana? Bearing in mind, as Mufa has already said, a lot of the NPCs in Africa, the National Paralympic Committees, are very, very young. Some of them only established a decade, 15 years ago, which is astounding when you think about it. So how is this going to influence the future beyond, through Tokyo and beyond into Paris, do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Look, as you already pointed out, most of the sports of parasports, they involve some kind of assistive technology of one nature or the other. The biggest, and most of those don't come cheap in terms of cost. And it is a big challenge for countries in Africa and elsewhere for their athletes to access the AT that they need, not only for their daily lives, but for participating in sport. And what often happens is then if you are fortunate like me, you might get a piece of equipment that is world class coming from a country, one of the advanced countries. But if you bring it in, what often happens is you go and it breaks down. Sometimes you do not have local expertise to either maintain and repair it, or the bits that you need to replace, you also have to import at a very high cost. So part of the solution that would help in not only increasing access to AT for sport or for daily living is to having solutions that are sustainable, in the sense that it involves local partners in the provision of those pieces of equipment. It would hopefully also lowers the cost of having them provided, because at the moment, bringing in things from across the continents to Africa only works as long as the piece of equipment or AT is in good condition. So there is need for having more organizations that also are involved in designing something which is durable and repairable, that can be maintained from local expertise without the need to always bring extra parts from overseas. Obviously, as you go higher on the high performance stream, you will require more advanced pieces of equipment, like some of them, if you are talking about chairs now, there's carbon fiber frames. I mean, that is at a higher level. But I think most of what we struggle with in the countries here is even the basic chair to go out or piece of equipment to just try the sport. I mean, sport is not just for the people that want to go to the games. Sport should be enjoyed by everybody, even if it's for recreation. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even have the AT that they need to go and try a sport and just have fun and then go back home. So that is a project like this would bring into the mindsets of the different stakeholders in the community, so that eventually we have solutions like this that are coming in. But I also just wanted to point something out that I strongly benefited me. We are not just talking about IT in relation to getting to sports equipment that you need to participate in. Sport itself can be an avenue for you to access AT for daily living. So I did mention that I never had a wheelchair that was custom built. And my first experience getting a custom built wheelchair is through having played sport and having access to certain people and organizations who then also saw the need for me to have a proper piece of equipment for my daily living. So it's not just sports AT, it is also through sport that you can get access to AT that you need for daily living.
And I think that perfectly rounds off the whole premise of the project. And I can only imagine the feeling that you must have had when you finally had a day chair that was built for you. I can't imagine how that must have felt for you, being able to finally travel and go about your business in a way that was comfortable and personal to you. That's the same kind of feeling we want others to hopefully experience through this project. Let's have a few closing remarks before we say goodbye. So Emma, in the immediacy, as we are recording, as you're listening to this episode of the Experts in Sport podcast, we are a few weeks away from the Paralympic Games. And as you might be listening further on down the line, so it might actually be going on. But in the immediacy, Emma, what is happening? You've got 1 minute. Tell us what is actually happening now, and what's being put in place to ensure that we can capture the lightning in the bottle.
Yeah, so we're working with the national broadcasters to try and create a bit of excitement around it through different kind of marketing and extra content, I guess, that can be put on to kind of get audiences aware, I suppose, that it's going to be happening and it's going to be on. So I think that's, in terms of the broadcasting, that's what we're doing to try and excite audiences. But ultimately, this Tokyo Games and the impact and the success of the coverage in terms of audience numbers across the region and through our interventions, we won't know that until sort of after the games and within the next four years, or probably 3 years now, won't it, to Paris. We'll be working, this project will continue, and we'll be working with these groups, and we're basically going to be building off the kind of data that we have from the audience data and the kind of engagement data that we have from the Tokyo Games in the region. And we're going to be looking at what we can do to build on that to make Paris even more impactful, to have even more of a greater reach across the region. So I think it's, I truly believe it's going to be a success. And I think, Mufi did such a great, he summed it up so well when he talks about the community engagement and the community theatre and the community screening. So thanks, Mufi, for doing that. But, all these things hopefully will have an impact, not just short term, but, longer term, Paris and then beyond. And, ultimately the goal of the IPC and the goal of this project is it's around access, equality of access, but it's also around being equality for people to be able to access the games wherever they live. They can tune in via radio, TV, online, whatever platform they use, they can tune in and they can access that coverage. And that's I guess that's the ultimate aim from a broadcasting perspective.
Access for all is the punchline. Mufu, with regards to community engagement, will a lot of the work be done during the Paralympic Games and immediately afterwards too? What are your final thoughts on your immediate work during the Games and after the Games as we look towards Paris?
Yes, I think the main activity I think will be happening in terms of community engagement, as we come close to the end of the Games. But at the moment, there are a number of things that we are trying to put into place to make communities actually aware. We will have what we call a pre-event visit into the areas where we're going to go to, partly to also make them aware that this is going to be happening. We've been talking to try to take some past recordings of some highlights from the previous Paralympics, at least 1 or 2 episodes, go and see, and then use that as a way of introducing, because people in the rural areas might not have the marketing that is happening on TV might not reach them. So we are also thinking of trying to go on the ground to try to make them aware. The areas that are being covered are quite big. For example, in Chirazru, there are about 15 primary schools, which cover an area of about 40 square kilometers, and then from there, once we engage local leaders on the ground to say this is what's going to be happening, and this is an example of what is going to be happening, and I am excited, and I'm going to follow that through AIMA in terms of the radio, partly of the radio broadcast. Radio is also another area which I think we could try to use, and I think we'll be discussing on how best, because MBC, Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, has both television and has radio. Their radio. There's Radio 1 and Radio 2. All of them are nationwide, and they're able to reach. So let's try to follow that up and see how we can complement the television broadcast, but apart from that, complement the community engagement that we will be doing. But yes, most of the work will be happening during and after the Tokyo Paralympics. But we will start somewhere to make sure that people are aware.
It sounds incredibly exciting to bring the Games through so many mediums, television and radio. And Nyasha, finally, athlete to athlete, how do you think the Games will go for those African nations? And is it a prerequisite that there has to be some level of success for these athletes as they go to a Games for this project to have an overall impact, or do you think there can be fruit that can be caught in other ways as well?
Yeah, I think at this stage, in terms of medals and such high level of achievements, I think it might be too soon. But as you know, the life of an athlete doesn't happen overnight. Part of the benefits that come out of this initiative is that the people that have been supported or are being supported now are much better prepared and ready to compete their best in the Games from 2024 going forward. But that doesn't mean to say that we do not expect people to do their best right now. And for sure, if somebody is good enough, and they should just go for it and bring whatever they can. But it is quite a journey, because a lot of the athletes have not had much support prior to the last 2-3 years. So I think putting that in context would help to understand why the different kind of performances, whatever they will be in the current Games. But hopefully then from now going forward, things will get better, and people and athletes will be able to bring home some medals to the continent, hopefully in numbers.
in great numbers. We have our fingers crossed. Yeah. We are aware that we're not doing this in a vacuum. Everybody is very aware of the pandemic and the constraints and the issues that has created, not just with this project, but also with the Paralympic Games. And we can only hope that athletes, coaches and NPCs will be best prepared to represent their nations to the fullest and as best as they possibly can. And with that being said, that brings us to the end of our our chat at the end of this episode of Experts in Sport. Thank you to the three of you for joining me and joining our audience over the last hour or so. It's been a really engaging conversation. So we wish you all the best with your work over the next couple of weeks, and we hope for great success. And we will return again with another episode to talk about the aftermath and just how wonderful the games were. So thank you to the three of you, and take care.
All right. Thank you very much, Sam. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Experts in Sport. If you'd like to get in touch to discuss any topics that you'd like to hear about, then contact me, Martin Foster, via my email m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Bye for now. See you next time.